Then he said to me, "Brother, I don't think I'm going to live to read this." 2 weeks later, he was shot to death.
Two men discharged shots at him from apparently very close range.
Someone looking amazement to the front, I knew they had shot my husband.
He raised his hand and Muslim greeting. Salam alaikum.
Salam alaikum.
The year was 1965. The Sound of Music was crushing it at the box office. The Rolling Stones couldn't get any satisfaction. And the Beatles were working 8 days a week.
This is a song. Shut up while he's talking.
But today, we're talking about the death of one of America's sharpest critics, Al-Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz, the man you and I know as Malcolm X. Malcolm X was a passionate human rights activist, black nationalist, and for most of his life, he'd been a scathing critic of America and the civil rights movement.
Know that in America, democracy is hypocrisy.
For most of his time in the spotlight, he was the face of the Nation of Islam and an opponent to Martin Luther King.
Today, Martin Luther King is just a 20th century or modern Uncle Tom.
But after seeing the Civil Rights Bill become law, he saw the change that could happen by working with the movement instead of against it. And so he did, until a day that could have been any other day. During a speech in front of 400 people, including his wife and children, Malcolm X was assassinated. But who killed Malcolm and why? Who would want him dead? The Nation of Islam, the FBI, the NYPD, Red China, the Soviet Union? Maybe Malcolm had himself killed. We're not going to get too deep into Malcolm X's life story, but there will be some in a future video. What we need to know is that Malcolm X was a key figure in the Nation of Islam, a religion that has as much to do with Islam as Scientology does with science. Malcolm had said that when he joined the Nation of Islam, it couldn't have been more than 400 people, and when he left, the membership was in the tens of thousands. While he wasn't the only reason for the explosive growth, his public speaking was a key part of it.
You should ask yourself who taught you to hate being what God gave you.
But I take it then you support the peaceful marches in Alabama and these places.
You don't get freedom peacefully.
They attack you, bust you all upside your mouth, and then take you to court and charge you with assault.
Even if we're not going to dig into it, it's important to acknowledge the connection to the Nation of Islam, because Malcolm X was a devout believer and wholly committed to the nation and its vision. When Alex Haley began writing Malcolm X's biography, Malcolm would only do so with Elijah Muhammad's explicit permission and only on the provision that all proceeds would go to the Nation of Islam. Most importantly, for the last 11 months of his life, Malcolm knew where the bodies were buried, where the skeletons were hidden, and when he left the nation in 1964, he became more open about their secrets. What secrets, you ask?
They put me out because of what I knew, and what I knew was told to me by Mr. Muhammad's son.
Who is the father of all of these various children?
The father was Elijah Muhammad himself.
And how many of these illegitimate children did he father with the sisters?
Well, he made 6 sisters pregnant. They all had children. 2 of those 6 had 2 children. One of those 2 is having a child right now.
From March 8th, 1964, Malcolm leaves the Nation of Islam, and for the next 11 months until his death, he focuses on 2 things. One is starting his new organizations, Muslim Mosque Inc. and the Organization of African American Unity. The other is going overseas to speak on issues of race. Oh, snap. There was a third one as well. He was trying to avoid being murdered. As soon as Malcolm leaves the Nation of Islam, there are threats to his life and actual attempts to murder him. Betty Shabazz, Malcolm's wife, would have calls to the house telling her that her husband was as good as dead. Malcolm would see people walking around the lobby of his hotel, asking what room he was staying in. An FBI informant was told that Malcolm would be bumped off, and Louis Farrakhan, this piece of shit, ordered a car bombing. And I say ordered a car bombing rather than having an attempted car bombing, because the guy that was told to car bomb Malcolm was a friend of his, and so he let him know that the Nation of Islam was actually gunning for him. Cars full of what Malcolm described as black Muslims would follow him around. One incident where a group of men approached Malcolm with knives only ends when Malcolm's security flashes a shotgun. Finally, after all of this, and through the ongoing threats, Malcolm X's house is firebombed. The house was being reclaimed by the Nation of Islam, and around when Malcolm appealed the order to vacate, they firebombed the house. Malcolm's daughters and pregnant wife were in the house at the time, and Thankfully, they escaped.
No, I don't worry. I tell you, I'm a man who believed that I died 20 years ago. And I live like a man who is dead already. I have no fear whatsoever of anybody or anything.
We're skipping ahead a little bit here, but after Malcolm X died, the NYPD said that they offered protection to Malcolm, who repeatedly refused it, and that they'd established a 20-man special squad to protect Malcolm. But in the 11 months leading to his death, there'd been many attempts on his life. Malcolm X knew he was marked for death. He was receiving calls from friends inside the Nation of Islam saying as much. The FBI knew he was marked for death. They were getting information saying as much. The NYPD knew he was marked for death. They were getting calls saying as much. Malcolm had a regular speaking engagement at the Audubon Ballroom every week, where anybody could come and hear him. On this particular day, Malcolm's usual easy demeanor was gone. His assistant described his walk as heavy and somber. He snapped at people, especially his assistant. His guest for the day speaking hadn't showed up, and his troubles had been weighing him down. His name having just been announced, Malcolm turned to his assistant, sighed heavily, and apologized. He stepped out onto the stage and
He raised his hand in Muslim greeting. Salam alaikum.
Salam alaikum.
there was an argument about someone being pickpocketed. And as the crowd looked back and security tried to settle it,
2 men discharged shots at him from apparently very close range.
Malcolm X was shot 21 times. One of the bullets pierced his heart. Malcolm X was carried to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. So who did it? The FBI? The Nation of Islam? The NYPD? The Nation of Islam killed Malcolm X. That point is the most obvious to me. They had said they'd wanted to do it, they repeatedly tried to do it, they had the most to gain from Malcolm's death, and they bragged about it later. Louis Farrakhan said, "Nations need to kill traitors," and that is what the nation did. But the more interesting thing for me is how culpable is the US law enforcement? The NYPD, well, they fucked up. As I mentioned before, the NYPD say they offered Malcolm X protection, but many of Malcolm X's associates said he complained that the police were not taking the threats on his life seriously and that he asked for protection and didn't get it. And where was this 20-man secret squad when Malcolm gets shot? Nowhere. The only gunman to be arrested on the scene is arrested by 2 cops that are driving past and heard the gunshots. Both the FBI and the NYPD had credible information from their own people that Malcolm X was going to be killed, and they didn't act on it. They just didn't care if Malcolm X died. Do I think the police acted with intent, or rather stood aside and let it happen? Maybe. Is it possible they weakened Malcolm's position? Absolutely. But I think it's more likely that they were incompetent. That incompetence even haunts Malcolm after his death. The police are said to have been dawdling around the crime scene with their hands in their pockets, letting people walk through the evidence without a sense of urgency or care. They arrested and charged 2 other men, despite there not being enough evidence, who have recently been exonerated. Thomas Heyer, who was arrested on the day, said that they weren't his accomplices, and when Thomas Heyer does provide a list of accomplices, well, the police don't really act on that either. It seems as though when Malcolm X was alive, law enforcement didn't care if he died. And now that he's dead, they don't care to find an answer either. As time goes on, we get new pieces of information and we'll never really know what happened, but we can hope to learn enough to get Malcolm X justice. What we do know is that these 2 men didn't do it, these 2 men are pieces of shit, and this man should have been able to achieve so much more.
Do you feel that your message, apparent message of love that you brought back from Islam is the real reason they're after you, because you're not hating as hard as they want you to?
Well, I never did hate anybody hard.
These men who were your brothers are making threats against your life?
No, because actually it's not their fault. Most of them, the rank-and-file Muslim brother, does not know what it's all about. They are out of religious sincerity. They think that they are doing the will of Allah by protecting a man who I myself taught them was divine.
If you like the video, subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. I try to get around to answering all the comments, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace. I'm recording this. This is going to be in the video. I feel like something out of Asterix and Obelisk.